everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today for the launch of our report paper, which is titled Financing for Feminist Futures, Seeding Pathways for Feminist Resourcing. We know it's such a busy time for every single person joining the call, so we really appreciate you showing up for yourselves and also others in the community today as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick housekeeping note. The first thing is that this call does have live translation available. So at the bottom of your screen, you can click the More button, click Interpretation, and select the interpretation channel that you require for your preferred language. On this call, we have English, Spanish, and French. So before we begin, please do make sure to tune in to your preferred language channel. If you need any support during the call today at all, please do reach out using the chat and one of our team members will happily help you out. Just something to note that this call is being recorded for those in our community who couldn't join, and this recording will be available in those three languages of English, Spanish, and French. You should all have access to the broader chat function, and there's also a Q&A box. Again, you can find this at the bottom of your screens. If you click More and click Q&A, we're inviting you to please share questions that you have from any of the discussions that you hear today. And all of those questions should be put in the Q&A function so that our staff team can have them all in one place and respond timely to you all. In a moment, I'll be introducing our webinar to you formally. So while we do that, it would be great if you could just check the chat. And you should be able to see a link to a Mentimeter. So for those of you who aren't quite familiar with Mentimeter and haven't used it before, you just click the link that's available in the chat and input the code that you can see. And there are a few different questions there that as we get started, it would be great for you to input your answers. Some of those questions are framed around where in the world are you joining us from our webinar today. There's over 500 of you signed up for this call, so it'd be really great to capture where everyone is joining from. And it will be wonderful if you could answer the questions that are posed in there. So hopefully you should be able to view that chat in a moment. I'll just double check with the team to make sure we can get that put in the chat for you all. And if not, we will find a way post-call to get answers from you all. So we'll get started with the introduction of our webinar, which, as I mentioned, is all focused on the launch of our report paper, which is Financing for Feminist Futures, Seeding Pathways for Feminist Resourcing. So we could go to the next slide, please. Don't know if one of the team are able to change the slides to talk us through. Thank you. So during our call today, just a quick reminder or introduction to what we'll cover in today's call. We'll start off with a reflection report presentation from our wonderful colleagues Chandreyi and Virginia. These are two brilliant staff members who have brought this report to life. And this report leading on from our Financing for Feminist Futures Conference that was held last year in Madrid, which don't worry, we'll talk all about that so you know what all of that is. We will then move on to a panel discussion where we will have a live Q&A. So as I mentioned, make sure to use that Q&A function so that you can have your questions answered. We will also have a quick fireside chat, and we will then move on to our closing, which has a really clear call to action. So if you're able to, please do stay until the end of the call so you can make the most of your time here. Brilliant. So during the kind of framing of our call, as I mentioned, it's all around making sure that everyone has the information that they need to work towards a feminist future and ensure that that feminist future is financed. So I'll now be passing on to the amazing team, Chandreyi and Virginia. As I mentioned, they are the team members who really brought this report to life. You'll hear from them where they will share key learnings, debates, emergent pathways that came from the Financing for Feminist Futures Conference. So whether you were able to attend with us in Madrid or not, this should be a really fruitful invitation to join us on this learning journey. So I'll pass over to Chandreyi and Virginia.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily, for that welcome. And it is really a pleasure to be in community with all of you. So sorry, I saw that apparently the chat is disabled now. It should be working, so apologies for that. So I'm Chandreyi. For those who don't know me, I know that there are friends and former colleagues who are joining, so welcome to you all. I work with the Walking the Talk consortium based in Hivos, and I'm the DML, Design, Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Officers and Project Officer. And together with Virginia, we are the co-authors of the reflection paper. Of course, this is a collective work that emerged and is informed by the reflections, conversations, strategies, points of tensions back in Madrid that we had back in Madrid in October. So today what we have prepared for you is a short presentation, about 10 minutes. Towards the end of the call, we're going to be sharing the launch page of the report with all the relevant information, the executive summary, the full report in 3 languages, Spanish, French, and English, so you can download it. And right now, we're just going to give you a little sneak peek of what's in it. So if we can move forward to the next slide. So we wanted to start with framing the context, right? The moment that we are in. 6 months have passed since October, and back then we were meeting 200 feminists and allies to think together and strategize on pathways for feminist resourcing in a year that had been critically serious for feminist resourcing. 6 months after that, we are seeing even more an acceleration of violence, of funding cuts. So we want to bring that into conversation today. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of that framing. So even as those in power normalize violence across bodies and across borders, feminist movements keep insisting on something radical. That imagination is a political act. They give up on, they refuse to give up on the beauty, on care, on the possibility, even if in the face of devastation. And this is part of how they resist. I also want to frame this conversation sharing an experience, a recent experience I had. Last month, I joined a webinar on feminist imaginaries from the Global South, which was a collaboration between AWID and South Feminist Futures, with an incredible lineup of feminists from the Swana region. These are feminists who are at the front lines of defending life in the midst of genocide, war, and crisis, and ask the audience a simple but unsettling question: who actually gets the space to imagine in the current context? The last few years have shown us that so-called red lines were never meant to protect everyone, if they existed at all, that they follow race, gender, and geography. And today, from Gaza to Iran to Lebanon, we're witnessing what are not isolated crises, but an expanding project of imperial violence. One that, of course, has centuries in the making, but it has always been met with resistance. Feminist resistance, Black resistance, peasant resistance, Global South resistance. At the same time, we're seeing how aid continues to shrink while military budgets explode. We're seeing scarcity, which is manufactured, the destruction of funding, and seeing violence, which is not a part of the system, but the system itself. And to this, and in response to this, I want to bring back some of the key feminist demands that some of the Swana feminists that were at the webinar that I attended share. They call for funding feminist movements, for ceasefire now, for an arms embargo, for canceling debt, end sanctions and economic warfare, and deliver reparations. These are conditions for survival and justice in today's world. They also want to bring a reflection for those of us working within Europe and the global north, within what we call the imperial core, which is that solidarity can stop at analysis. We must practice it, and it has to disrupt. It has to move resources back toward life, because there is no feminist futures without liberation and no justice without the courage to name harm and act differently. As many have said, this is not the time to freeze. It's a time to re-strategize and to do so with courage. So just to frame the paper and a lot of the conversations that happen in Madrid and how they've traveled to today's discussion. And I'm going to pass over to Virginia, who's going to talk about a little bit about the process and the methodology of the paper. So Virginia, over to you.
Hello, everyone. So nice to see so many familiar names from the conference. I am a consultant for Walking the Talk. I work as a session coordinator at the conference, and now I have co-written the report with my colleague Chandreyi, this reflections paper. And I would like to very humbly share a little bit with you about the process of writing this reflections paper. So when we concluded the conference and analyzed the materials and content that came from it, we kept coming back to the questions on what to do with all the rich conversations, exchanges, and learning that emerged from our gathering in Madrid 6 months ago. That's when we decided to write this reflection paper as a way to document some of this learning and not let such important conversations fade. First, to honor the space and everyone who helped shape it, but also to offer a useful tool to relevant upcoming moments that concern the future of feminist financing. As we brought together also a very experienced team of feminists to co-create the conference methodology, we thought it could be valuable to also document what a feminist conference can look like, as also a way to inspire future gatherings. And if you are interested, there is the first annex of the paper. We have listed and explained the choices taken and the partnerships made to build the F4FF. So writing this reflection paper meant to us an offering back to the F4FF community, but going beyond, a way of sharing these learnings with the broader feminist ecosystem, including those who couldn't be there in person with us. While the paper was mainly informed by the collective learning from all the participants, we also recognize that given the diversity of backgrounds, realities present at the conference, so many countries were there, we cannot, of course, fully capture all the richness and single opinions that circulated during the days we had been together. Lastly, to all the future readers of the paper, it does not consist in a comprehensive summary of every session held during the conference. And as a knowledge product, it brings to the table some of the key insights, tensions, and strategies shared during the conference, contributing to a broader political narrative on feminist resourcing. To what concerns the structure of the paper, if you have been in the conference, you will recognize that we have kept the same structure. This is to say that the paper is divided in 3 main subject tracks. In the same way, our learning huddles and concurrent sessions were divided. So now jumping to the content, when it comes to the paper itself, we decided not to go too deep in the content in this short presentation, especially since some of the discussions will come up during the panel today. Instead, we'll give you just a high-level overview of what you can expect to find in the paper. In track 1, which talks about building our movements and strategizing together, you will see the words collaboration and intersectionality as its center. In such a challenging context that we all know, collaboration appeared as a key strategy and even mentioned by one of the participants as our biggest disruption against the system. Of course, we cannot talk about collaboration in feminist movements without talking about intersectionality, which appears not just as a strategy, but as a necessity, a way to really center the most marginalized and those facing multiple oppressions in our movements and strategies. In track 1, we explored how feminist financing connects with climate justice, LGBTQ+ rights, disability justice, and calls to decolonize funding. At the same time, there is a strong emphasis that the level of collaboration we call for within movements must also be reflected in the funding system itself. So to illustrate this, the paper highlights the role of emerging networks, feminist funds, and alliances, and the call that a win for one is a win for all. A recent example of this kind of collaboration is the recently launched Accelerate Together initiative, which we will hear more about during the panel. Another example of good collaboration is represented in the work of Women and Feminists Fund, which keep a close relationship with the movements and are recognized by feminists as the backbone of movement resourcing. So this is a very, very short overview of track 1. Now we can move on to the next slide. Jumping to track 2, that was dedicated to discussing how to protect additional financing sources, the paper reflects on how feminists are holding the line within what we have called disputed territories, sharing strategies from participants along some key demands to funders. A few highlights in track 2 would be, first, on anti-gender movements. From Brazil, Luciana Brito shared with us in a session something important. Anti-right movements aren't just ideological, they are profitable. There is an entire business model behind them, with companies and digital platforms making money off hate and anti-gender narratives. So it's not enough for feminists to just respond with better narratives. We also have to go after the financial incentives that keep these movements alive. Then another highlight would be on ODA. One idea that came up was we need to defend ODA and feminist cooperation, but also not stop there. That means protecting the resources that exist, pushing back against funding cuts, and holding government to their commitments. But it also means questioning the colonial roots of ODA and pushing for resources to actually reach the movements. Finally, the last highlight is on philanthropy. As public funding shrinks, as we see, philanthropy is stepping in more and more. That can be useful, but it has to be approached carefully. Increase the funding, but also divesting from her. Initiatives such as Funders for Palestine call on philanthropy to divest from occupation and militarism, emphasizing that such a stance is essential for feminist and human rights movements. The paper suggests ways to engage with it, while being clear that philanthropy should support but never replace public funding. Finally, we move on to track 3. We can also move on the slide, please, where we have discussed in track 3 feminist financing in the FFD Forum process and also explored new possibilities. Following the conclusion of the FFD Forum, participants held a very critical view of the process. The persistent financing gap, the omission of feminist perspectives, and the growing presence of the private sector emerged as frustrations across the ecosystem. These spaces were also described as colonial arenas that reproduce global power dynamics, and responding to that, the paper reflects on how we could reclaim multilateralism. Despite these tensions, the final part of track 3 focus on what can still be built from the FFD4 process. Participants identified modest but meaningful openings, most of them related to the defense of microeconomic change, debt cancellation, progressive taxation, and fiscal justice as financing tools capable of unlocking resources for gender equality and feminist movements. Progress toward an UN tax convention, the need for an UN-led debt framework were identified as spaces to advocate for more fair approaches. And finally, also responding to this moment, Track 3 created spaces to discuss innovative financing. Among other reflections, the paper highlights the need to move beyond grants that we have been talking a lot, as well as the inhabiting contradictions on private financing. So this is to give just at least a gist of what you can find in the paper. Of course, there's much more topics, and some of those that I mentioned today will be deepened in the panel that will be moderated by my colleague Chandreyi. I pass it over to you again.
Thank you, Virginia, for that overview, and really happy to see that the chat is working and seeing all of your introductions. Just also very happy to see a fellow Nicaraguan. Hola, Maricela, I don't know you, but really nice to that you're with us. So just moving on into our panel, our fantastic panel discussion. A warm welcome to the feminists who are in community with us and who will be sharing and contextualizing some of the discussions that happen in Madrid today. I would like to frame the panel, which we have titled Seeding Pathways for Feminist Resources, Reinvesting in Life as Systems Fracture. So I want to start by saying that there was a grounding truth, which is not new to any of us, but it was very present in the conversations back in Madrid, which is that the money is political. I want to quote one of the speakers at the conference who said that the current crisis is not one of a scarcity, but one of justice and solidarity. And when hegemonic systems profit from death and genocide, like in Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, Sudan, and so many other territories, from the destruction of the planet, from the militarization and criminalization of our bodies, communities, and territories, reinvesting in life, and we're using this term because we understand that feminist work is life-saving and life-sustaining work, is both a matter of survival and of building other possible worlds. So the panel today is inviting us to explore this together in the following 50 minutes or so. So we're going to be in conversations for about 30 minutes to hear from the 5 different speakers. We're very honored to be in community, like I said, with you, and on behalf of the Walking the Talk Consortium, we're very grateful to be hosting this space with all of you together. I also want to mention that 3 of the speakers today, 3 of the organizations that are with us today are co-partners in the Resourcing Hub at Women Deliver. And the Resourcing Hub is being hosted by the Alliance for Feminist Movements. So we have Rachel today with us, along with Prospera, the International Network for Women's and Feminist Funds, and AWID. And this is, I think this is sort of the first, let's say, public official promotion of the hub, which has been envisioned as a political home for all things feminist resourcing conversations at Women Deliver. So it's also an invitation for those of you who will be in that space to join us and to continue the conversation. I also want to say that I won't be doing a full introduction for each of the panelists just because of, in the sake of time. But we have prepared a document which you'll see in the chat with their bios and photos, so you can learn more about the work and background. So we invite you to access the document. So to begin, Carla, I would like to turn to you first. And you're joining, you're the assistant to the director at the Asfari Institute, and you are based and working from within Lebanon and across the Swana region. I want to ask you, how do militarization, economic warfare, and humanitarian governance reshape not only what resources are available, but also how feminist movements are expected to operate, adapt, and survive in a permanent state of crisis. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you so much, Chandreyi. I want to perhaps start from my positionality. I'm a young feminist researcher from the south of Lebanon, from a bordering village that is currently being demolished and potentially occupied by the Israeli forces. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge how timely this conversation is. Just a few days ago, on April 8th, Lebanon experienced one of the most horrific Israeli attacks in recent months. They launched around 100 airstrikes in 10 minutes, targeting densely populated residential areas at peak hour, killing at least 357 people and injuring over 1,200 people. But this is not an isolated moment. It is part of a long continuum of imperial violence across Lebanon and the wider Swana region, from the Lebanese civil war to repeated Israeli aggressions over the years, to the genocide in Gaza and the increased military violence in the West Bank, and the protracted war in Syria, as well as the ongoing civil war in Sudan and beyond. And this is, only a part of a broader ongoing dynamic of war and instability across the region. And this is what produces not only just destruction, but also a condition of permanent instability. At the same time, Lebanon reflects a broader regional pattern of austerity and state retreat. Public institutions, which are already historically weak, they have collapsed, and basic rights like healthcare, education, and social protection are no longer guaranteed, but they're actually increasingly privatized and deeply unequal. Across Swana, economic crises, debt regimes, and shrinking public sectors are pushing the burden of survival onto households and communities, primarily in the form of increased burden of care work for women and girls. So in this context, the feminist movements are not optional, but actually they are very essential. From our work in Lebanon, what becomes very clear is that feminist civil society has shifted their work into emergency mode during war. Feminist organizations, collectives, and activists step far beyond their mandates to shelter, feed, and provide care in real time in a context where the state is absent or insufficient. But more importantly, militarization, austerity, and imperial violence reshape not only the availability of resources, but also what feminist movements are expected to do. They're expected to fill systemic gaps, to deliver services, and to operate within constrained humanitarian frameworks. And yet, what we see in practice is something else. Feminist movements are building intersectional responses that center those most often excluded, whether it's through queer-safe shelters, disability-aware relief, menstrual equity initiatives, or community-based food systems that preserve dignity and not just survival. So they are not only reacting to crises, they are actually proactively designing alternative infrastructures of care. And they are doing so within a deepening funding crisis where resources are shrinking, short-term, and highly conditional. This tells us that feminist movements across Lebanon and Swana operate within a condition of historical and permanent vulnerability. And they do not actually wait for the state to function. They anticipate its absence, its failures, or its limits. So even when the state is present, feminist movements remain essential, not as substitutes, but as actors that expose these limits and push for a more just, inclusive, and accountable systems. These intersecting forces attempt to discipline feminist movements into service providers. But what we continue to see both in Lebanon and across the regions is a refusal of that role. Feminist movements insist on remaining political actors, responding to immediate needs while challenging the structures that produce crisis in the first place. And that is where their transformative power lies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carla. I think what was very clear in your contribution is all the different levels where feminists are, disputing power, right? We're talking about transformation, and I think transformation in the context of genocide, right? This was one of the questions in that webinar with Swana Feminist. Who gets to imagine when bombs are being dropped on you and your community? So thank you so much for sharing and really owning into the vital and critical role that feminist movements play precisely in moments of crisis. So speaking very aligned to this, I wanna turn to Laila, Are you with us, Laila? Yes, I see you. I hadn't.
Yes.
Perfect. Hi. Hello. Laila, so I wanna, touching upon Carla's intervention about the role of feminist movement. You are someone who is very, very aware, right? And who is also within Prospera a champion of the role of women's in feminist movements in your position as a network of women's and feminist funds. And one thing that was talked about at the conference in Madrid time and again, not only in Madrid, I mean, I think within the feminist resourcing ecosystem, in the movement ecosystem, is the role of women's and feminist funds as the backbone of feminist resourcing, right? So I want to ask you, looking at Prospera's 25th year journey, which was also mentioned at the conference as an example of what it means to hold movement infrastructure over time, as we're facing overlapping crises, how is the network adapting its advocacy and calls to action? And how is Prospera supporting funds to sustain movement infrastructure by engaging also more politically with donors and imagining the future of feminist resourcing? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chandreyi, and thank you for inviting Prospera to this event and all the solidarity with all of Carla. I'm very touched. I'm from Syria, and I know exactly what it's like to be talking about the movement and resourcing while also hearing the bombs going in the background. I think women and feminist movements, women and feminist funds, I look at them as the response of the movement for taking control over how they are resourced. The funds module is to bring the trust-based resourcing and the proximity to the community into the heart of the resourcing cycle. Prospera's 25th celebration was not only us looking at what we have achieved together, but also how the module stood and developed over these 25 years. And what does it mean and how is it done differently when we work collectively and when we serve the movement collectively? Women and feminist funds work with such proximity to the communities they serve. They don't only bring themselves proximate to the community, but also the decision making. Our funds, 75% of Prospera's funds work in the Global South and East. The absolute majority of them do participatory grant making, and almost all of them do a lot more than just passing the money. And this is really important because allowing us to work collectively means we present our causes differently and the kind of impact we wish to achieve is done differently. When we work individually, we risk being reduced to just intermediaries. When we work collectively, we are a thought partner at the table on where this is being designed. And we are elevating the voices and experiences of the community in places that have sometimes been created to be exclusionary of the movement. And women and feminist funds have taken this as a political responsibility. One of the main things that allow us to change these strategies and the tools with which we do advocacy is political clarity. Although the Prospera's funds take it upon themselves to bring more and better resources to the movement, ones that are flexible, trust-based, going straight to the communities and are allowing to build an infrastructure that allow them to grow, allow them to move their bandwidth to the work they do most rather than just being stuck in a cycle of resourcing. We also are very clear about our political message. This is one that is hoping to transform how resourcing is done. It's hoping to transform philanthropy. We want not to get more and better funds that are overall hoping to keep everybody in their place. We're hoping to imagine and work towards a better future for the movement. And we do think, as feminists do, we do think that the meaningful work is the long-term infrastructure, almost always invisible work that allows great change to happen. Impact is not created in boardrooms and on auditoriums. It is the consistent work of the labor in the world. The majority of it is unpaid or very poorly paid and done by women and marginalized communities. How can we reflect on, how can we create infrastructures that account for that and create this steady structure that allows to work to be visibilized, resourced, not dropped as soon as crisis hits. And I think that's what Women Feminist Funds continue to try and continue to endeavor to do better, and working collectively allows them to do that. We have a lot of examples. Sorry.
If you can wrap up your
So we have a lot of examples about how we respond in crisis, how we responded in which are available. I'm not gonna take your time with, but I just want to conclude with 3 quick points. The first one is these times bring a duty to all of us to actively fight fragmentation. There is the anti-rights, but also sometimes not even the extremes. Sometimes those who we thought of our allies are fragmenting the movement and pulling it in different directions, and we need to be intentional about not doing that. It is vital to our survival and to our political message. And the second one is that we need to accept that we always continue to change and adapt strategies of how we resource the movement. Bilaterals, states were not the main source of funding for the movement 20 years ago. It's the movement that has worked to make that happen. They were not set to give trust-based funding, but they are doing that now. And in the same sense, we need to accept that now we have the solid center to be able to approach new ways of funding. Prospera has approached a new era where we and other co-leads are leading the Accelerate Together campaign. This is Prospera, Mama Cash, Alliance for Feminist Movements, and Gender Funders Collab. And it is far out of our comfort zones, but it is our collective duty to go seek new spaces exactly out of our comfort zone to bring more money to the women feminist movements around the world, because we cannot afford not to. And lastly, in order to do that, we need to, together in our different positionalities, to look at narratives and impacts and put them forward more intentionally in their diversities. Women and feminist movements around the world have had tangible impact in so many areas that we don't usually speak about as much, and this is the time to do that and to bring it to new audiences. So I hope we manage collectively to come closer to that, especially in this time of a huge stretch for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. And there's so much that you cover in. Rachel will be talking about the Accelerate Together campaign, which is, really exciting as an initiative, which really puts forward that sense of collaboration, right? And like Virginia was discussing when she shared about the paper, something that came out very, very, very clear, very strongly at the conference was collaboration as a form of disruption. And this is something that I feel, Prospera, but also feminist and women's funds are practicing through precisely that exchange of perspectives, of knowledge, and you're really how close you work with the movement. So I think if the point of departure are the margins, are the communities, and how you can build infrastructure that enable their power, it's a good way forward. So Prospera has had that sort of positionality and working on that for 25 years. So that's really, really great. And thank you for sharing that. Something you mentioned as well, and to connect with our next speaker. So Ina, I'm coming to you and AWID. Laila, you talked about, the incredible amount of invisible labor that comes into being when we talk about, feminist resourcing, feminist work. And this touches upon, of course, the sustainability of movements, right? But also how, the durability, how do we move them in the long term? So, Ina, I want to move to you to talk about autonomous resourcing. Where is the money? AWID's research, which has become, a feminist staple for many of us, in that it has profoundly shaped how movements and funders see patterns, right? To visibilize the patterns in feminist resources only decades, and to really bring this call of how chronically underfunded feminist organizing is. But it has also helped resources move back to movements. In the recent reports, which was launched last year, we also had a session where Alejandra from AWID shared about, this insight. One of the focus insights in this last report is the growing importance of autonomous resourcing as a form of sustainability of movements. In the current moment, what does autonomy really mean for feminist movements? How do we name, value, and protect the invisible labor that keeps movements alive? And what concrete shifts are needed to resource movements on their own terms? Over to you, Ina.
Thank you, Chandreyi, and also thank you everybody for the pleasure of being here with you, but also for the very thoughtful political grounding of this conversation. We started with positionality, so I'll join that. I'm calling you from the not so sunny Berlin, Germany, but also Germany that happens to be the second largest export of military equipment to Israel. So from this place, I want to send solidarity to fellow feminists in Lebanon, Palestine, Iran, Syria, throughout the Swana region, solidarity that is not just in words, but in actual commitment to continue fighting together to stop, the fascist, imperialist, racist, Zionist forces of destruction that are going completely wild these days. It's just unimaginable, and really to continue and keep fighting for freedom and liberation for all of us. So that's actually a straightforward way to get into sustainability and autonomy, and how central they are for feminist organizing and for building feminist political power. Yeah. And speaking of sustainability, there's a certain paradox here. So as feminists, sustainability is really in our DNA, because all our work is essentially about, our activism is about sustaining each other, sustaining our communities, sustaining the causes that we are fighting for, and especially in context and force, that would rather we don't exist, or that our identities don't exist. And so sustainability is really essential. But on the other hand, our institutional realities are just incredibly precarious. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm hearing, every other day from a fellow, organization or a group saying, we're really struggling. We don't know how we will be able to pay salaries. So, we are all in the same boat, but also not in the same boat, because this moment is more precarious for some of us than others. But really, the recent funding cuts, they have revealed how precarious and fragile the entire feminist funding landscape is. And so that got us in AWID thinking about the many ways that the funding system is keeping movements fragile, structurally, but also reflecting on the many ways we have been claiming sustainability and autonomy, and the ways, I think, Laila, you mentioned it, of taking ownership of our resourcing infrastructure over the decades. And I think the infrastructure of feminist and women's funds is a really major testament to that. And also in our own data of where is the money, looking at women's funds becoming the most, like the primary source of funding for feminist movements. Now, a couple of more numbers and data that are relevant here from our research that covered more than 1,000 feminist collectives and organizations all over the world. 64% told us that they would not be able to operate for more than 6 months if external funding stopped. Nearly half already faced the possibility of closure, and I'm sure after last year, even more. Only 4% of the respondents have access to grants longer than 3 years. So that got us to reflect. We should actually start going beyond the demand of core multi-year flexible funding. We need more autonomy over how we use our funds. We need to be able to put them in savings and reserves. We need to be able to put them into initiatives that may generate income for us. We need to own our own infrastructure, our own physical meeting spaces, our transportation solutions, our catering businesses. So really to be able to use those funds to also build our own feminist economies and our own infrastructure. We did start talking about the Swana region. So, nearly 2/3, or 63% of respondents told us they had to change priorities to align with funder agendas. So when we talk about autonomy, about sustainability, it's also about political autonomy. It's ensuring that we don't have those strings attached. We had 86% of respondents saying that little funding exists for their movements or for their themes or for their regions. So that means you already have very few alternatives that would come with fewer strings attached. And so especially now that the whole world and also the funding landscape gets more conservative, preserving our political autonomy is really a huge priority. And it was the first time we looked into data that is specific to autonomous resourcing, which we understand as resourcing that movements generate on their own without strings attached. And that can also in themselves be a practice of building the movement or the community. So an overwhelming majority of 81% of the organizations rely on the resources that they generate directly. Activist labor, in-kind support, mutual aid networks, community fundraising, membership fees, other solidarity-based methods. And for nearly a third of them, these autonomous resources constitute their primary means of survival. So this is something we all know, but we have not seen that in data and numbers before, and we want to recognize that. We want to recognize and make it visible that the incredible achievements of feminist movements globally have been their primary resources have been their own resources. It is just that they are sometimes so taken for granted that we don't see them as, our labor has been for generations. And I see I have 1 more minute. Is that true?
You had 1 more minute, but it's past.
Okay,
so
it's past.
Good. You can wrap up your thought. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I think the last sentence is really that at this point we have to create spaces to figure out what sustainability actually means for feminist movements and for our own institutions on our own terms. So not just a narrative to satisfy donor requirements or, tick the box, but what does sustainability mean for us? And that also comes with understanding how do we still need to change the structures and the funding systems we operate within so that they stop manufacturing precarity and vulnerability. So that comes with redistributing power, risk, responsibility among civil society, philanthropy, development institutions. And just to say that some of that gets very easily technical. Those of us working in those contexts know that. So especially as we need to translate ourselves so that we are understood by people and institutions that live in completely different parallel realities and different ideologies, it's really important we always keep in mind the political grounding, that we give each other reality checks, and that we accept accountability with love and appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. And really interesting. I was also there for the webinar launch of the report, and there was also a very lively discussion about autonomous resourcing, which, it would then highlighted is not a new per se conversation, but I think it's really important the insights of your research. And also I appreciate the analysis that you have, right? It's not to romanticize autonomous resourcing, which is definitely the backbone, right, for many organizations and movements that cannot access other forms of funding for different reasons, political, registration, etc. But then how do we make autonomy a principle that funders with power can also leverage and make possible? So I think these are important conversations precisely for the framing, the times that we're in, and to move them forward. So thank you for sharing. Rachel, now I would like to move to you. So Laila also, you brought the initiative, the campaign of Accelerate Together. This question around, what does it mean to have autonomy as a principle centering self-determination, right? Of how we use our funding, how can we generate wealth for our movements and organization. And this pushes us to ask hard questions, to sit with discomfort, which was also something that happened at the conference back in Madrid, right? To sit at the discomfort about where money comes from, and whether current funding architectures are fit for future feminists, for the futures feminists are building. So Rachel, turning to you and the work of the Alliance for Feminist Movements, it would be very interesting to hear, how are you thinking about a shift beyond ODA? I think it goes without explaining because of what we're seeing. What has your journey been so far towards and beyond ODA resourcing strategy, and how are initiatives like the Accelerate Together campaign, but other emerging innovative finance approaches shaping this work? You have, 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the invitation, and to everyone else that's spoken. So there's a lot in that question, which I think is really speaking to this moment that we're in, where the way that money has been flowing to movements over the past 80 years is really in flux. the norms, the paradigms that have structured the way that money moves are being questioned by donors themselves. I think movements have been raising questions for decades, but this moment is a bit different because I think that donors and movements are asking questions at the same time, but they're not necessarily the same questions. And so these changes also are part of the broader shifts in the economic and geopolitical landscapes that folks have been talking about. So this rise in transactional relationships, this rising national security concerns, rapidly expanding defense budgets, the emergence of new donors, heightened interest among many donors to move money in new ways. And as Ina was just talking about, this heightened interest among many movements to be able to resource themselves directly and assert that autonomy and control. Now, our small pool of donors, of which the ODA giving governments have been really important, is changing, right? Traditional donors are leaving, but new ones are coming in. So we're seeing increased development assistance from non-DAC countries. So then countries like China, Turkey, and the Gulf countries, though they haven't been particularly interested in resourcing gender equality or feminist movements. We're seeing global South philanthropy is really growing, and that there's particular interest in gender equality among younger wealth holders. And feminist movements, as Ina was telling us, are finding really innovative ways to resource themselves and generate income as they always have. I would also just add remittances and diaspora funding also continue to be incredibly important sources of resources too, though there tend to be sort of pushed to the side of our resourcing conversations. But these newer actors are also moving their money in really different ways. And that's happening at the same time that the traditional donors are also rethinking their focus on grants as the default way in which they move their money. So we see a lot of government donors that are looking at the role of multilateral development banks or their own development finance institutions as important channels for moving money that our organizations and movements have very little experience with and are not well suited to access. They're also reconsidering their relationship to the private sector, as I feel like governments always are these days, but including their relationship to philanthropy and also rethinking what direct government to government support looks like in development funding. I would say this renewed interest in public-private partnerships and in return-seeking investments rather than grants is something we're also seeing mirrored in the priorities of some foundations too. And then on the individual side, we're seeing fewer formal foundations that are being set up with individuals increasingly giving funding directly or through donor advisors. Was talking to us about autonomous resourcing, but we're also seeing pressures on donors to give fewer and bigger grants. And all of these trends are increasing the importance of connections and personal networks rather than open calls in order to access funding. And then, of course, we're seeing increase in restrictions on how money can move with expansions of foreign agent laws, increased scrutiny of public and private funding of NGOs, and of course, the newly expanded global gag rule. And so just from where I'm sitting, I see that who moves money, how they move it is going to look really different in 5 years. And certainly at the AFM, what we're trying to do is to make sure that in this new world, the core work of feminist movements is still resourced by making sure our movements understand what these shifts are and are able to respond to what's coming, and that we have enough feminist movements in those conversations to shape what is happening. And I think we also have to continue to articulate the importance of the really core parts of our work that will never and should never generate a profit, even as the demands for us to make the investment case for our work is going to grow. I know I was asked to talk about Accelerate Together, so if you'll give me the leeway to just do 30 seconds, I would say that these are changes that are happening and they're going to happen over many years. And while these changes are ongoing and we're building these new systems, we also have to fund our work with urgency right now. And that's very much where Accelerate Together comes in. As Laila was saying, and others are saying, this is a new initiative that has a really ambitious goal to bring in $600 million annually in new money to the feminist funding ecosystem so that we can keep this core work moving as we're building these new paradigms. As others have said, the collective is really central to our goals as we've been talking about our wins come from our collective work. Our wins come because we work in movements, but so much of the way that we are pushed to resource our work really focuses on our individual achievements. And what I get so excited about with the prospect of Accelerate Together is this ability to tell our movement-wide stories and to make the case for funding movements and not just individual organizations, because this ethos of the campaign, as folks were saying, is to really make it that a win for one is a win for all. So thank you for obliging me with that little bit of extra time.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And I remember in our track 2 conversations at the conference, this ethos, right, this call of a win for one is a win for all, was very present, right? And I think, like you're saying, the campaign is trying to do different things. So obviously mobilize and enable more resources, but like you're saying as well, show the impact and tell different narratives in terms of the possibilities of different and alternative resourcing ways, pathways. So thank you for speaking to that. And I think also it's very interesting to have the analysis, the sort of like political economy of, you know, resourcing and what's coming our way for the next 5 years and how to be prepared. So thank you for that. And lastly, but not least, Micaela, now I'm turning to you. We're a little over time, but I think we're good. We're gonna have hopefully about 10 minutes for our Q&A. So just before I go to Micaela, just to remind everyone to put your comments or questions. I've seen some of you have already added into the Q&A chat, so we can move on into the questions after Micaela. So Micaela, yes, I have your question. I just want to mention that, of course, you're no strange to walking the talk. You are one of the researchers on the Architecture of Change Compendium, where you with other, feminist economies, research on fiscal justice, and macroeconomic feminist justice. And now you're working on an analysis also in the walking the talk space on the financing for development outcomes, particularly looking at the Sevilla platform of action initiatives that have a gender equality lens. So I want to ask you, given that background from a feminist macroeconomic lens and your engagement as well with the financing for development process, where are you seeing the strongest openings today for resourcing gender equality? And how can struggles around debt, tax justice, fiscal policy, and care center economies within FFD, so within the financing for development process or beyond, create real and tangible possibilities for feminist resourcing? So just a note that Micaela will speak in Spanish, so just for our audience to know, and switch to the canals and interpretation. So over to you, Micaela.
Thank you. I will be speaking in English to make it easier for everyone. So you can just stay in the channel that you are. So thank you. Thank you also to my fellow panelists. I echo the points that you shared, and I would like to start with the truth. I think that crosses all these reflections, which is that austerity, as we know it, undermines human rights. In Europe, we are seeing an increase in military spending alongside a decline in official development assistance. Also, in many countries in the global south, the burden of the debt servicing exceeds the spending on health or education. So fiscal rules continue to shrink policy space, leading to a withdrawal of the state presence from key areas that sustain our everyday lives. But I want to pause here because we should not read this as a symptom of an era and normalize these political decisions, because that is what they are. They are political choices, because that way we are treating them as if they were inevitable steps for governments. But the reality is quite the opposite. There is growing evidence that is showing that increasing the investment in social infrastructure, care, health, education, it generates higher social and economic returns compared to other types of spending, like defense spending. So we can see that these investments are paying for itself over time, giving these high returns, right? So with this information, it becomes clear that our main problem, it is not whether there is money to finance, for example, care systems, but why decision makers choose to allocate it to purposes that run against human rights rather to sustaining our lives. So from a feminist macroeconomic perspective, that is also outlined in the report that you mentioned in the Architecture of Change, the main opportunities lie in promoting debt justice to expand fiscal space, including addressing the non-legitimate debt and reducing excessive interest burdens, progressive taxation to redistribute income and wealth and prevent the production of or the reproduction of extreme accumulation of wealth, and shift the logic of public spending priorities towards social infrastructure. Instead of building missiles, build hospitals. So within the financing for development process, these opportunities are reflected in initiatives that link financing, care systems, and gender equality, although they still require greater institutionalization and political commitment. This is to avoid remaining as isolated efforts in a context where they are increasingly marginalized. So the FFD Forum that was held in Seville last year, it was for the first time held in a global North country, and it produces two key outcomes. One is the commitment, and the other one is the platform for action. This one includes around 130 multi-stakeholder initiatives that are voluntary, and that is clear that in a context of feminist backlash, these platform space proved to be more accurate for advancing these initiatives related to gender equality, while the progress in the multilateral space was more challenging. So to answer your question directly, there are three issues that we must keep in mind. First, that care systems are not an isolated issue within the economy, and that gender equality is not an add-on or a nice to have. They are central institutional components that shape how our economies function. So therefore, integrating them into fiscal and financial initiatives is key to building more equitable societies. Secondly, that countries in the global south have a lot to teach the north in terms of social organization of care. We are seeing countries like Uruguay, like Brazil, like Colombia, Mexico, among others, that are leading the development of locally designed care system that respond to community needs, include the community in their design, and seek to mobilize the financing accordingly.
Micaela, just sorry to interrupt, if you can wrap up your last.
It's the last point.
Thank you.
The last point, and I think that it was also mentioned by some of the panelists, we urgently need to shift the conversation toward quality over quantity. If we continue to measure only the financial flows toward care and gender equality, we are missing the goal of promoting these inclusive futures, because many of these flows risk sustaining problematic forms of microfinance, or they rely on commodification. They might even worsen the fiscal condition. So we need to reclaim the question on how we want care to be organized and advocate to make that vision a reality. But I trust that as long as we stay organized, that we share knowledge and continue pushing for these advocacy initiatives, we will keep building hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Micaela, for that and for the work that you're carrying. Yeah, I think what you're saying, and from the conversations at the conference as well around FFD is how do we sit, with the trends and the tensions of, private finance solutions being pushed, as this panacea, and what does it mean for us as feminists to reclaim, right? How we organize care. And something that also came really strongly is that, we should and must shift our gaze to the so-called global south, right? A lot of the countries, like you've mentioned, Brazil, Uruguay, are really leading in this reorganization of social reproduction. How do we put care as a pillar that sustains life, and how then we translate that into, global macroeconomic processes and policies. So thank you. I need to apologize to our panelists and to the audience because we're running over time. We have only 3 minutes for the segment. So we're gonna skip the Q&A. I think what we're gonna do is that we're gonna go to our Fireside chat and see if we have some time afterwards, and then maybe we can bring a space for discussion and Q&A. But if I can encourage you, there are questions in the chat, and they are addressed to, I think, to the different speakers. So you can also answer to participants already in the chat. And if not, we can also follow up after the webinar. So apologies to our audience, to our participants, and the panel on time. But yes, we're going to move forward. And I'm going to pass on to Bruna, who's going to lead on the Fireside chat and tell us about upcoming global convenings. So Bruna, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chandreyi, and thanks everybody who has joined us and is taking the time to follow through this wonderful conversation. Extending my thanks as well to this wonderful panel. We are truly delighted to share the space with you today, and we deeply value your leadership and vision in shaping how we carry this work forward, grounded in the reality of the different movements that you are representing here. I just wanted to cite a little bit of the contest on walking the talk when we hosted the conference and bring it to the present moment. So when we hosted the Financing for Feminist Futures Conference last October, we knew that we would be a labor of love and an exercise in both solidarity and humility, given all that it takes to organize a convening amidst growing scarcity and such a fractured and turbulent global moment. So Mónica, really sending all of my best wishes and strength to you. Kudos for all of the work ahead and past. But we were also intentional. We set out to create a space for joy, for genuine connection, collective learning and unlearning, and for strategic thinking, so that we could identify actionable demands and different pathways to continue strengthening feminist resourcing and futures. 6 months on, our commitment remains strong. As a consortium, a European-based consortium with 5 organizations working within the European space. Walking the talk is not only capturing and sharing the learnings from the conference, but also continue to center the demands of feminist movements from the majority world, both in our global advocacy and in our work at national levels with European governments and other bilateral and multilateral donors. The FFF conference intentionally took place a few months after the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. Was just highlighted by Micaela also in her presentation, which was hosted by Spain in July 2025. That was a critical convening that sets the agenda for financing decisions and for reshaping the global financial architecture.
Bruna, sorry to interrupt you. Our interpreters are asking if you could speak a little bit slowly for them.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Yes, sorry about that. So the International Conference on Financing for Development, which was a critical convening, and that sets the agenda for financial decisions and reshaping the global financial architecture. While that space, as we have just heard, may not have fully delivered on our level of ambition for gender transformative financing or systemic macroeconomic change and development cooperation, it does offer important entry points for continued advocacy and to take this work forward. And it is precisely through these openings that we must continue to push for more and better funding that truly reaches feminist movements and for systems that are accountable to the realities we are working to transform. You can see in the chat links to different policy briefs and resources we have worked on since October. But turning to the present, we remain committed to continue to connect the dots and look forward to continue these conversations next week at the Financing for Development Forum. If you are in New York attending the forum, please let us know. We will be engaging with civil society partners, UN agencies, and governments to bring forward actionable recommendations on how FFD for commitments on gender equality can be further adopted and implemented. We will also be at Women Deliver Next together with our amazing partners at the Resourcing Hub, and we are very much looking forward to that. At the Hub, Walking the Talk will host 2 sessions, one focused on movement and how other stakeholders are working to harness and shift narratives to safeguard and unlock more resources for gender equality and for feminist movements. This is something that came up very clearly in Madrid and continues to emerge. So we're really hoping that you can join us for this conversation. That is going to be a series of very interesting lightning talks. And the second session will be a strategies convening on centering feminist financing at the upcoming Feminist Foreign Policy Ministerial hosted by Spain in June, where we are proud to be part of the Civil Society Committee, helping to mobilize civil society participation at both the pre-conference and the main conference, and where we will also bring practical recommendations on how we can connect development cooperation and feminist financing with feminist foreign policy frameworks. And with that being said, I have the pleasure of being joined by Mónica Pinto de Ribeiro Hancke, Chief of Staff at Women Deliver, and Ana Maria Alonso, Ambassador at Large for Feminist Foreign Policy at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to give us a glimpse of how these conversations are traveling to these important convenings and what can be expected for us. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Mónica and Ambassador. And Ambassador, since we're in the midst of the feminist community, I will skip protocol and jump directly into the questions, starting with Mónica. Mónica, Women Deliver often emphasize that turning moments into movements through accountability and follow through. As we build toward the conference, Women Deliver 2026, how do you see resourcing as a core pillar of that work, and what concrete commitments would funders, policymakers, and movement actors need to make so that Women delivers not just visibility, but real material change?
Thank you. Muito obrigada, Bruna. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you today. And given time, I will not try to repeat too much of what others have said, but really get to the point of what is Women Deliver 2026 offering, and what are we, to your question exactly, what are we expecting to hear, and what can you all bring to this space? I do want to start just by echoing my solidarity that other comrades have shared with regards to those living in Palestine, Lebanon, Iran, Syria, Sudan, among others, experiencing the vile abomination that sets the political context really for why we are in this moment and what we are bringing to the table. So also, as Chandreyi quoted earlier, we know this is a political conversation, and that really is the spine and backbone, if you will, of what Women Deliver 2026 is about. It's centering this political moment. It's centering not the question of scarcity of resources, but the political choice that each of us are making as stakeholders, in this ecosystem to address throughout the conference as a whole. So for those who may or may not be as familiar, the Women Deliver conference taking place in 2 short weeks in Narm, Melbourne, Australia, has 4 pathways, each of which tracks very clearly to this conversation. So the first pathway being disrupting the now. So this is really an honest reckoning for this moment, whether that's around ODA, multilateral financing, philanthropy, our ecosystem at large, and really having the essential conversations about these contested systems that have, as others have very clearly said, often reinforced donor-driven priorities or that of the global minority. And so what does it mean to actually revisit these systems and holding the line, as we've been saying, on rights that have been maintained? It's not necessarily about preventing further setbacks, but about not preserving these flawed systems that have enabled them to begin with. The second conference pathway being building the vision. And as so many have already said, we know what this feminist vision is. It's loud, it's clear, it's beautifully drawn in our arts, in our murals, in our music. But what does it actually mean to center global majority leadership in these funding conversations, investing intersectionally across queer, trans, liberation, disability justice, racial justice, climate, and so on and so forth? Because as Rachel and others have said, siloing our movements is weakening our collective power. So how do we, as those movement actors, bring ourselves even closer together? That leads me to the third pathway, which is aligning for action. And so this is moving from that sort of commitment space into coordinated strategy. So breaking down some of these competitive models that have pit us against each other towards more collective energy with a shared vision in mind. And the last pathway being sustaining the movement. And I don't necessarily mean only financially, but what does it mean to build durable, movement-owned infrastructure that outlives any single donor cycle or any geopolitical moment of crisis? So sort of at the heart of Women Deliver and in terms of what we are asking for, what we look for commitments and how we'll sustain this, we're asking for accountability, and accountability infrastructure that recenters how we relate to one another, not just as states to the people that live within its borders, but as movement actors and members of this ecosystem, all of whom have a stake in ensuring that this vision comes to life and is sustained long term. This also means looking at ourselves. How do we, as others have said, to resource ourselves in this moment, but also build the systems that outlast it? And so very concretely speaking, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to close with sort of my 3 key asks. Regardless of where you situate yourself in this movement right now, what we're asking for and hope to see at the conference, we're not naively promising, for example, a funding windfall or waterfall. We know that that is unrealistic in this exact moment. But how can we actually use a strategic space and build those accountable relationships for that windfall in future? So in terms of funders, we're looking to interrogate those questions, not just about multi-year flexible funding commitments, the asks that we have all made loud and clear for decades now, but rather how are funders shifting that power, increasing transparency, strengthening collaboration with and alongside movements. And we're asking for funders to come to the conference ready to make those binding commitments, not aspirational ones, but in that moment, how are you going to answer those questions? For policymakers and member states, we're looking at reaffirming their obligations to deliver on social services, on the rights of the people that live within their borders. And so this isn't about a language of partnership sort of obscuring the fact that we know that the resourcing human rights and in that women, gender equality, gender diverse people is a government duty. And so we don't want that to get sort of shadowed by the broader infrastructure questions that we have talked about. And lastly, to all of us as movement actors, showing up for accountability with each other and within ourselves. What's led us here has been, and to some extent, our own complicity in a system that has failed us. So what does it mean to name that, to honestly reconcile with that for ourselves, and then leave the conference, leave Women Deliver 2026 with those commitments to each other and to ourselves? So I'll just end by saying that the question for us isn't whether our financing systems, that feminist futures are already being built. It's rather that will our financing systems evolve to sustain that work? And we're hoping that Women Deliver 2026 offers the space to further that conversation and hopefully decide. So thank you, and looking forward to further seeing many of you in NARM, hopefully, and continuing this conversation there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mónica.
Maravilloso.
We know that it's an extremely busy time for you, so we really appreciate you making the time for being with us in community today. and for also clearly articulating these very clear asks to different stakeholders and how can we show up collectively to try and break from competition frameworks and to push for more collaborative and collective action and building of structure, accountability, and system that work from us and can outlast this moment of continued crisis. So thank you so much for also hosting Women Deliver. We're looking forward to that. And now turning to Ana Alonso, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us today. Just wanted to start, making a note that Spain for some time now has been a beacon of light for us, for feminists, for movements, for advocates in really being a champion for gender equality within the multilateral system, hosting FFD Forum and hosting the upcoming Feminist Foreign Policy Ministerial in Madrid. And in a context of declining ODA, as we know, also have reached its peak in contributions. So thank you for that. Thank you for your leadership. And we wanted to take the time today to ask you if you could please share what are Spain's priority for the upcoming ministerial, particularly regarding the role of civil society, and if as Spain continues to lead on gender equality, especially by promoting social investment over militarization, how is Spain linking the financing for development agenda with its feminist foreign policy, and what opportunities does the ministerial offer to advance feminist financing? Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Bruna.
Thank you very much, Bruna. Thank you very much, Hivos, and Walking the Talk for this webinar and fire chat we are having now. Mónica, I greet Women Deliver, and thank you very much for the work the organization work you're conducting for the Melbourne meeting. I'm sorry I cannot be there because I will be here organizing the 5th Ministerial Conference of Feminist Foreign Policy. Bruna, you referred to the priorities of Spain for this conference. This is the 5th conference on feminist foreign policy. It started in Berlin, and the last one took place in Paris. And the themes have been changing based on the context, on the international context and its evolution, and based on the needs of each time. And we also have some priorities now, because now the context is much more challenging and critical, more today than last year, in 2025. So that's why we have approached this conference thinking of new priorities, which are peace, and democracy construction. To know what's the position of Spain in terms of peace. We have always denounced at any time all conflicts that are sustained in time, and or the conflicts that appeared some years ago in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Palestine, or more recently, the attack against Iran. Our motto is stop the war, no to war. So this is one of the axes that will be leading our conference on feminist foreign policy. How, based on feminism, we as women can build peace, can be peace builders. And then we have democracy construction. Right now, liberal democracies, such as we know them today, are being threatened. They are at risk. The democracy construction was pushed as of 1945, after the end of the Second World War. But you know that we acknowledge that at that time solid foundations were laid down, but multilateralism right now is being attacked. We want to identify these attacks, these risks, and we want to propose solutions for democracy, for a democracy based on feminism. Democracies are not fair, are not inclusive without the full, safe, and significant participation of all women in the public life, in politics. Therefore, we will also make an analysis of these perspectives. You also mentioned the resourcing, funding. And Spain, 2 years ago, offered itself as a place to host the fourth conference for development funding after 10 years without holding any conferences. And the reason for this is very clear. We want a development funding going beyond the guidelines established in the last 30 years. And besides, we want to bring here the Seville summit because there's a link between funding, resourcing, and feminism, or gender equality, at least. As you said, funding has been getting far from the construction of a fair society, from the well-being society. It's away from health and education, and funding now is concentrated on funding militarism, given this context I mentioned before. So we want to continue discussing those topics that have to do with that type of funding so that it may be more equitable. Resources are always limited, I know, but those resources have to be focused mainly and firmly in social justice. And social justice is based on gender equality. Sorry for interrupting you, but we are going to close soon. So, Bruna, you already know that in this conference, we have organized a civil society committee so that they have their meeting forum the day before. Their discussions will be included in the conference, and they will be sharing their conclusions. They will be delivering a political statement in the framework of the conference. We are also working with walking the talk, and they will be co-organizers. I don't have any more time available. Thank you, Bruna, for telling me about the time, to be mindful of the time.
Thanks to everybody who is still with us. We're going to take just 5 minutes to close, but we know that respecting people's time, if you have to leave, thank you so much for being with us today. And before sharing this back with Emily, just wanted to thank you for making the link, the nexus, highlighting the nexus between feminist financing and financing and feminism, and what does it mean to invest in feminist futures, in social justice, to provide peace and democracy. And that links very much with the theme of the feminist foreign policy, as you said, is much needed in this context of deep fragmentation. So with that being said, Emily, this is over to you, and thanks again to everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, to all of our speakers, our interpreters, our wonderful hosts. It's been really, really lovely to share the space with you all today. And I think the main thing that we really want you all to take away from this space is that our speakers haven't just been heard, but they've been deeply listened to. There's real expertise and value in all of the information and perspectives that have been shared. And as the kind of whole purpose of the bringing together of our space today, you can now see the chat where you will have a link to our reflection paper. And this is our launch page. You can download an executive summary for those of us who are equally as time limited. Then that gives all of the key information. And this is also available to download in English, French, and Spanish. In that same launch page, in that same link, you will also find a social media toolkit. And I think it was Laila who mentioned in your introduction and in your speech that we shouldn't allow our feminist work to be invisible. So I will steal that and loop it here, and to say it would be really wonderful if all of you could please share the brilliant work that has went into our report paper and those really rich findings within this. So please do share this across your platforms. If you would rather repost work rather than post your own, then you can find our consortium partners accounts from Hivos, Ecupop, ODI, DSW, and Restless Development on Instagram and LinkedIn. So you're very welcome to reshare that across our channels. If you do have any additional questions or you'd like to get in touch, then we do have a specific information email address that our Hivos colleagues hold. So we'll make sure to copy that into the chat so that you can follow up with us if you have any questions. Post this call, we will also drop an email with all of the key information that you'll need. But we'll end as we began, which is within feminist solidarity, appreciation for our collective work that brings us together, and hopefully with renewed commitment to resourcing feminist futures. So thank you all for joining. We'll keep in touch. We'll hopefully see you all at future convenings, whether that's at Women Deliver, the FFD Forums, and the FFP Ministerials. So we'll keep in touch and speak soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.